My name is Scott Ross, and I was a student loan debtor from 1987 to 2013. On my 44th birthday last year, June 14th, Flag Day, I made the final payment on my student loan debt. And I know that I am one of the lucky ones. What we're going to do here is we're going to talk a little bit about the crisis. I'll do introductions first. We have U.S. Representative Mark Pocan. Next to him we have State Representative Cory Mason. And next to him we have Senator Dave Hansen. So we did some research here, and we want to show you some of the things that we found. What we found from the research we did, that in the state of Wisconsin, the average student loan payment is $388 a month. Okay? We have 753,000 federal student loan borrowers in the state of Wisconsin. So not even taking into account the people with private student loan debt, if you do the mathematics on that, and because I had a good public education, I can do that math, $388 a month times 753,000 people, 12 months a year, is $3.5 billion that people in the state of Wisconsin are paying out at the bare minimum in student loan debt every single year. That's $3.5 billion that's not available to make the purchases that make the economy grow. Saul, next slide. Also, we wanted to point this out to you. Our research shows that if you have some college but not a degree, you're paying for 17.2 years. If you have an associate degree, you're paying for 16.8 years. If you have a bachelor's degree, 18.7 years, and if you have a graduate degree, 22.1 years. Go to the next slide. Next thing we wanted to find out economic impact of this, and we just have a couple slides on this. The first is, what kind of car do you own if you have a student loan debt versus not having a student loan debt? And what we found was that if you have a student loan debt, you are twice as likely to be the owner of a used car instead of a new car. Okay, next slide. If you have a student loan debt, you are twice as likely to be a renter or live with someone, like your parents, than having that embodiment of the middle class, a home of your own.
Thank you, Scott, and thank everyone for coming today on what's really a very important topic that is getting a lot more attention nationally. And I just have to do this. A lot of the credit goes to One Wisconsin Now. I think some of the innovative work that they've done is to help show some of the real statistics. Because I remember about a year ago in Congress, in my first year, and we were trying to deal with Stafford loans. They were at 3.4%. If we didn't do anything, they were going to increase. There were different proposals that were out there, and ultimately they went to 3.8%, 8.6% after being tied to Treasury bills. But there were a number of proposals, and that seems to be where we always talked about the problem with student loans. But thanks to the work that One Wisconsin Now did, they started really showing us, hey, look, that's the people who are in school now, but look at all the people who are out of school who are paying these really big student loans. And this is people who are paying 6.8% and higher rates at a time the market rate for buying a house or a car is significantly lower. So let me just start with a couple kind of 30,000-foot facts about student debt. $1.2 trillion, second only to home mortgages. Just looking back a few years, 20 years ago, in 1993, 45% of people who left college had student debt. Most recent statistics, 94% of people who leave college have student debt. It's changed dramatically. Just in the last 11 years, the amount of student debt has quadrupled just in a little over a decade in what's out there. So people are paying a whole lot more in student debt, and as Scott illustrated, and he'll have a lot more data on this, that takes money directly out of the economy. Because while you're paying that loan off, you're not buying a new car, you're not buying a home, and you're doing things that have a directly negative impact on what could be a really positive approach towards the economy as we're trying to come out of this recession, and we are very slowly. We know that in Wisconsin you probably leave with about $26,000 in debt as an undergrad, about $29,000 nationally is the average, about double that if you're going to grad school. Those are some really significant and big debts. And one of the things that came out of the research from One Wisconsin Now and has really got nationwide attention now is the idea that we have a lot of people who are currently paying those loans who are paying at really high rates. And that effect is directly having an effect on the economy. What can we do to make it easier for those folks to be able to pay those loans off at a lower rate? And that is simply looking at what you do in business, you do with a home, you can do with a car, local and state governments do. You refinance loans. The one area it's not very easy to do this at all is in student debt. So far there's 3 major bills in Congress, all quite honestly very, very similar with the same goal in mind. One that I put out last fall, and then since then this year we've had 2 other major ones put out to deal directly with that, to allow people to be able to refinance. Now the good news on a global picture in Congress is both in the House and the Senate, Democratic leadership has recognized this as a significant issue. When we did the budget in the Budget Committee for the House of Representatives, we had 16 amendments as Democrats. One of the amendments that we introduced specifically went to the bill that I introduced last fall about allowing people to refinance loans at the lowest possible rate. And so Democrats in the House have embraced the idea that we need to do this. And most recently, Senator Gillibrand from New York and Senator Warren from Massachusetts have each introduced nearly identical bills to do the same, to lower student financial rates. And the Senate leadership just announced they plan on taking this up in June. So you have the Senate leadership, Senate Democrats saying this is something they're taking to the floor in June. The House Democrats tried to take it to the budget, but we can't put things on the floor because we're still in the minority. But it has captured a large chunk of Congress to realizing that this is something we simply must do. So that's the bills we have in Congress. We're trying to move them forward. We're trying to right now get authors and people to support, but we've got leadership's buy-in in both the House and the Senate. I think it's going to be important in the next 4 weeks to really watch what happens, especially in the Senate. But this is an important conversation, and the single best way people back home can deal with this is to share your stories.
Ask and ye shall get. I think what we're going to do at this point is we're going to allow you the opportunity to share some of your stories. So who wants to share their story?
My name is DeDarmo. I am 22 years old. I just finished my last final, and I am $58,000 in debt. I have a very middle-class family. My dad is a small business owner. My mom works in the kitchen at the Veterans Home in Union Grove, Wisconsin. And my dad was like, I really want you to consider the choice that you're making. So I really want you to consider the choice that you're making and make sure that you are making the best choice for you, because you're going to be the one that ends up paying for this in the long run. So I thought about it. It was really hard. And I decided to come to Wisconsin. Hands down, best choice I've made ever. But I'm still $58,000 in debt from a public university. And I'm scared. I'm actually terrified. This is going to cost me about 2 Ford Focuses. I can't tell you how many pairs of Levi jeans, a house, and a family. I don't feel comfortable, bringing a family into the world in a place where by the time my kids go to college, I could still be paying back my debt.
Thank you very much. Shawn Pfaff, Mayor of Fitchburg, 43 years old next June 19th, so I'm 42 now. I got out of graduate school debt on May 26th, 2011, so right before my 40th birthday. Scott, thanks for this. This is something that impacts our generation as Generation Xers. This is something we are dealing with a lot. And as a mayor of a city that is one of the fastest growing cities in Dane County and probably Wisconsin proportionally, in a city that has a lot of young people, one of the youngest cities and one of the most educated cities, this impacts us. Fitchburg is a place where a lot of young families want to live because of the location, the great schools, all the amenities. But if they are not able to buy houses, and as you pointed out, Scott, that is really significant impact on our community. We want to have people be invested in our community. If you own a home, you're more invested. If you own a home and more invested, you're going to care about what your community looks like. So my message to this group is that this is needed. And Congressman Mark, thank you. You're a good friend of Fitchburg, and in your battling hard. I know your colleague Ron Kind is all over this as well from my native western Wisconsin. This is our generation's battle, and we've got to get it. Lawmakers, I don't know if they totally understand this, how significant this is, because you always hear the stories, oh, when I went to undergrad, it cost $180 to go to Eau Claire back in the 70s. That's not the case now, and there's a lot of reasons for that, and Cory and Senator Dave and Mark, you all know that because you've sat in the legislature and you've seen the funding go and this and that. But I ask you as a local official who has been in debt, and I was blessed maybe as an undergrad when I went to Eau Claire. My parents were farmers, and I had some debt, but I also had some grants as well. Got some scholarships and things like that. Lower middle class, the middle class roots. So I was fortunate enough that I didn't have debt when I got out of undergrad. But I decided to go to graduate school. And I went when I was 29. In my 30s, life goes on. You do things in your 30s, and you buy homes and other things. And that was, I still have never bought a new car. And probably won't for a while, but that's the way it is. But I applaud you. I want to be part of this effort to help. And thank you for bringing this to attention. This is a national issue with a lot at stake. It has a lot to do with good, solid cities like Fitchburg who need this issue to be solved. So thanks for bringing it forward.
My college career actually started 7 years ago at UW-Stevens Point. I came from a lower middle class family, and even with my family's background, I couldn't afford the tuition at a state university, and so I had to rely on financial aid and student loans to get through my first 2 years of college. But I was one of the students that was priced out of college. From 2007 to 2009, my tuition went up $1,600 a year. And so after 2 years of school and thousands of dollars in loans already racked up, I had to drop out so that I could take advantage of the GI Bill, because that was the only option that I had to afford a college education in Wisconsin. So after I joined the Army, less than a year later I was deployed to Afghanistan. I was deployed to Kandahar. And while I was going on daily patrols in Kandahar, I was also forced to make payments on my student loans, because there aren't any common sense consumer protections on these loans. And so now I'm grateful, and I realize that I'm very lucky that I have the opportunity to go to school under the GI Bill, but students shouldn't have to make the type of choice that I had to make. Students shouldn't have to go to war in order to go to college. And so I want to thank you, Representative Pocan, thank you, Representative Mason and Senator Hansen, for taking up this issue of college affordability and specifically refinancing, because I'm looking at the next 2 decades of my life repaying student loans rather than buying a house or forming a new business or reinvesting in my community. And so I think it's really important that all of us in this room, because I saw that almost everybody raised their hands that we are impacted by this issue in some way, shape, or form. And I think that we just need to be more vocal about sharing our stories and how this impacts us individually. Thanks.
Thank you, Saul.
And 10 years ago, I was on the Board of Regents and president of the technical college system. Back then, Elizabeth Warren, who was at Harvard, said, giving more loans to students like throwing rocks at a drowning person. Now, if we can bail out Wall Street, who was too big to fail, we have a $1.2 trillion debt, which the Bush administration turned around and gave a 2-sheet piece of paper and bail them out for $1 trillion. Why can't we do the same for student debt? It would be the biggest stimulus package. Now, I understand the pragmatism and the politics of what's going on in Washington, but this becomes a campaign issue, and it's nonpartisan. This is about stimulating the economy so that people can buy homes. It's talking about putting things back in the hands of the average student, and at the same time, at the state level, a 10-year freeze on tuition or roll it back to 2004 levels when I was there.
And what's your name?
My name is Rajai Atalla. I live in the town of Middleton. The point I want to make is that there's something more fundamental than the issue of refinancing. There's been a change in the value system in this country. When I came to this country as a refugee in 1952, when Truman was president, it was possible for me and my classmates to work part-time during the year and full-time during the summer at a minimum wage of 40 cents an hour and still cover all of our expenses. That's because at that point in time, the value system prevailing in this country was a qualified student should be able to go to a state university tuition-free. The tuition, the average car has gone up by a factor of 10, the average house has gone up by a factor of 10. Tuition at a state university has gone up by a factor of 100. I compared it for both the public schools and the private universities. And that all happened, I believe, after Reagan started advocating the notion that those who benefit from the education should pay for it, as opposed to recognizing that nowadays college education, higher education, should be an entitlement just like high school education is. This is the way it is in Europe, this is the way it is in some of the underdeveloped countries, and our young people are competing in a global economy with people from other parts of the world who have not had to borrow money to make it through college. So I think it is important to focus on that. How are we competitive globally when we all of a sudden bury our head in the sand and say, okay, the students have to pay for it and then pay it back in loans? I mean, I think it's fundamentally absurd. Reagan pushed that idea, and then all of the governors lined up behind it.
So just to tell sort of a story in terms of background, I've been on the budget committee now for 3 cycles, 3 biennia, and every time we're on the Joint Finance Committee and we get to the subject of higher education funding, I always propose more money for student grants to hold down the cost of tuition. And every time I am unsuccessful. So that is frustrating, but when we got to this issue about student loan debt, and really was educated in part by the great advocacy that One Wisconsin Now has done, a couple of things really became apparent. Number one, just saying let's stick more money into colleges and universities to hold down the cost of tuition through grants wasn't changing the debate. So we thought about how could we draft a bill that might actually repeal or appeal to Republican sensibilities. And so the bill has 4 provisions. I'll talk about 2 of them. The most important thing that it does, though, is that the federal government isn't going to let people refinance their student loan debts at lower rates. Well, why shouldn't the state use its bonding authority to let Wisconsin residents do exactly that? If Washington's too broken to act, couldn't Madison step in and use its bonding authority the same way it does for housing and economic development authorities that currently exist now to let people finance and save hundreds of dollars a year? The other thing that we did to try to appeal to Republicans is while you are in college, your parents can deduct up to $6,000 a year approximately of your tuition, but it's only for those years that you're in college. Our idea was, well, why don't you let people deduct their student loan debt moving forward, since it takes on average almost 19 years just to pay off an undergraduate loan. So we were trying to get a bipartisan dialogue going where they might think about the thing a little bit differently and actually address the issue. I mean, what I learned in this debate is this is not a millennial issue, this is not a Gen X issue, this is an issue that affects people into their 60s. And I just wanted to share a couple of the stories that we heard from the testimony that we took that weren't just extremely compelling stories from recent graduates. We had one woman who came and testified who was 61 years old, and she got her master's degree. She was a music teacher, and she took on, she underwrote her, one of her kids' loans. And so at 61 years old, she owes $150,000 in student loan debt, and she'll pay it off when she's 84, which essentially means she's not going to have a retirement. It means instead of having any sort of economic security in her old age, she will be paying to do the work that she did to make sure she was a better educator for the kids she gave her career educating and making sure one of her kids should get through college. The other thing that surprised me about it is how pervasive this is, even amongst very professional careers. We heard from dentists who say that it is not unusual for somebody coming out of dental school to have $400,000 of student loan debt. And granted, dentists make a pretty decent sum of money, but $400,000 is, that's not just a house, that's a couple houses. I mean, I don't know what it is in Ford Focuses, but it's a lot of money. We had testimony from a physician, a woman who was a family practitioner, who dedicated her life to wanting to be a doctor and heal the sick and help people in her community. And she testified that her loans, both federal and private, were so high that as a physician, more than half of her income was going to pay off her student loan debt because she had more than $100,000 in debt. I have one colleague, I won't say his name in case he doesn't want me to say, but he gave a speech about it on the floor. He also went to Marquette Law School and wants a life in public service. He's a great freshman legislator from the Milwaukee area. He owes more than $150,000 in student loan debt, and he's trying to wrap his head around as he's thinking about starting a family and wants to have a career and makes a decent middle class income as a legislator, but this issue of owing $156,000 in student loan debt is just crippling him. And so what we have found is, yes, we need to make access to college affordable the way it once was, but we also need to address these 2 or 3 generations now who are paying for years and years of debt. And the question all too often I'm 41, the question that most of my contemporaries have is, gee, is there any way we'll pay off our student loan debts before our kids start college? And the answer basically is, no, you won't. You will be paying, while your kids are entering college, you will still be paying off your debt. And just to put one other piece of it into perspective, there was one fact that I saw recently that I thought merits mentioning. So 60% of the student loan debt held in this country is held by people that are still over 30. So think about it, more than half, 60% of the debt of people paying student loan debts are people over 30. So this has not only a long-lasting effect on people who are graduates, but this is not just something that affects people going into college or just getting out of college. This is people struggling to raise their families. This is people who are not buying a home as part of the American dream. These are people who don't have the resources to start a small business or to buy a new car or to save for their own retirement, their own economic security. So at the state level, we have tried very hard. If Congress can't act, we tried to craft this proposal, the higher ed, lower debt bill, to appeal to Republicans. And I would encourage each and every one of you to do it, because the interesting thing about the bill, even though every single Democrat in the legislature signed on to it, not one Republican did. But I had more than a dozen Republicans pull me aside and tell me a story, much like we did at the beginning here, and said, my cousin owes more than $100,000 in student loans, or my niece owns thousands, or I have an employee who, and it's, well, why can't we get together on this? And so we've got to keep talking about it, and politicians react to the electorate, and if people start making it clear that this is an issue that they're voting on and going to hold people like me accountable to, then I think you're going to see a change. But at both the state and federal level, I think you're going to see people continue to talk about this. But I want to thank people for coming out tonight and sharing their stories. They're far better than the statistics that we get. So thank you.
This should be nonpartisan or bipartisan. But when you put a bill out there and every Senate Democrat and every Assembly Democrat puts their name on it, that never happens. But yet not one Republican would support it. And we had a public hearing and they made up all kinds of excuses, never ever giving us a suggestion how we can make it better. But the problem they seem to have in this economy is they think people in debt might be people that are poor, might be people that are in debt because of college. They think we're all deadbeats somehow. Yet anybody that has gone to school is an industrious individual that's trying to take that next step forward. And I really do appreciate, and I don't know what your interest rates are, but there is no way in my way of thinking that an interest rate of 8, 10, 12, or even 6 or 7 makes any sense when the banks are paying out, what, 0.5% on a savings account or whatever. And I don't know how many know this, that the profit from what you are providing to the federal government is $66 billion off of student debt last year alone. $66 billion. And according to the Congressional Budget Office, every $100 in student loans offered by the government will generate between $13 and $16 in profit. Great return on the investment, but it's being done on your back. And it's just absolutely not the right thing to do. We must fix it. We must find a way. Our government should not be profiting at the expense of average citizens who are being forced to borrow in order to pay for their education. But $66 billion in a year. And you are providing federal government that, but it's on your back. And our higher ed lower debt bill will ease the financial burden on hundreds of thousands of Wisconsin citizens who have incurred debt for trying to better themselves in our state. And it doesn't offer giveaways, and it won't solve the bigger problem with skyrocketing cost of getting a diploma. What it does do is provide a way for borrowers to refinance their student loan debt, just like you can do with a home or auto loan. It makes no sense to me. I could go in, and I did it several times with my house to refinance because I get a lower rate. We might have started at 8 or 9, we got it down to 6, eventually we got it down to 3 or 4. You can't do that. The federal government in the 90s decided their solution to the default crisis, and Wisconsin really doesn't have that problem, their decision was to lock in the interest rates where you really could not refinance like you can with a car or what you can do with a home. But the whole thing, and I think what Wisconsin now has talked about, just think of the economic stimulus of that $66 billion going back into the economy. And it is sad to me that the other side of the aisle couldn't understand what we're trying to do. At least sit at the table with us and deal with a problem that should be dealt with. There's no way you should have $58,000 in debt. I know they are freezing tuitions now, but if we could lower your interest rate down to 4%, like Congressman Pocan is doing, that would go a long way in helping. And it would help grow our future. And if we're going to stimulate the economy, what better way is there than doing that? And because our plan would pour more money into the pockets of college graduates, it would make it more affordable for workers here to repay their student loans compared to other states. We could be a state that would be the brain gain rather than the brain drain. We could bring people in because we would provide them an opportunity as residents to have a lower interest rate. And it's time that we find real solutions to this very real problem. And I really think if they can't do it at the federal level, maybe it's time in November to let people know on the other side of the aisle, this is an issue that could really help our state grow the economy. Put money in the hands of people that will spend it. Your ability to raise a family, your ability to buy a new car, your ability to buy a home. But we should lower the interest rate. There's absolutely no excuse for the federal government to make $66 billion on your backs. It's inexcusable. We must fix it.